The wind howled across the prairie like a living thing the night. Clara Whitmore realized she had made the greatest mistake of her life. It clawed at the thin wooden walls of the farmhouse and slipped through every crack as if determined to claim her first. She had traveled more than 1,000 miles to be here, leaving behind the soot-stained factories of Boston and the quiet grave of her mother, answering an advertisement that promised stability, marriage, and a fresh beginning in the Wyoming Territory. The letter had been polite, almost charming. God-fearing rancher seeks strong, loyal wife. Comfortable home. Safe future. The men who signed it, Edgar Boone, had even included a small pressed wildflower between the pages. Clara had held that letter to her chest on the train west, whispering to herself that this was her miracle. But miracles, she would soon learn, do not arrive with whiskey on their breath and cruelty in their eyes. Edgar was not the man from the letter. He was large and heavy-handed, his voice like gravel and his temper like a struck match. The first crack in her illusion appeared the day she stepped off the stagecoach and saw no wildflowers. No warm smile, only a scowl and a muttered complaint about how much she had cost him. The second crack came when he told her the house chores were hers before she had even unpacked her small trunk. By the end of the first week, the cracks had formed a canyon. Edgar drank every evening. When he drank, he blamed Clara for everything: the dry cattle troughs, the broken fence posts, the early frost. The apologies she offered seemed to feed his anger rather than calm it. Bruises bloomed along her arms like dark violets. Still, she endured. She told herself that marriage meant perseverance. She told herself that winter would pass. But winter did not pass, it deepened. The night Edgar threw her out began like many others. He had returned from town smelling of whiskey and defeat, furious about losing money in a card game. Clara had burned the stew slightly, distracted by the ache in her ribs from the previous night's shove. When Edgar tasted the bitterness, his face twisted. He accused her of trying to poison him. She tried to explain, her voice trembling. But he struck the table so hard the bowls rattled. Then he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the door. Snow swirled outside, thick and merciless. Clara clung to the doorframe, begging him not to send her out. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. "You want to ruin my life?" he snarled. "Then freeze in it." He shoved her into the snow and slammed the door. Clara fell hard, the icy ground stealing her breath. She pounded on the door until her knuckles split, but no answer came. The farmhouse lantern flickered through the window once, then went dark. The prairie stretched endlessly around her, white and unforgiving. Her thin shawl was no match for the cold that bit into her bones. For a moment, she considered lying down and letting the snow cover her. Perhaps it would be easier. But somewhere inside her, a fragile spark of defiance glowed. She would not die for Edgar Boone's rage. She stumbled toward the barn, hoping for shelter among the hay. Her fingers were numb by the time she reached the door. It was locked. The wind screamed louder, as though mocking her. Clara's vision blurred. Snow crusted her lashes. Each breath felt like knives in her lungs. She whispered her mother's name, not sure whether she was praying or saying goodbye. Then she heard it, the faint but unmistakable rhythm of hooves cutting through snow. At first, she thought it was a hallucination. But the sound grew clearer, accompanied by the creak of leather and the snort of a horse. Through the white haze emerged a tall silhouette on horseback. The rider drew closer. Lantern light revealing a broad-shouldered cowboy wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat brim dusted with snow. He took in the scene in an instant, the closed farmhouse door, the shivering woman barely able to stand. He dismounted without hesitation. "Ma'am," he called, his voice steady and deep. "Can you hear me?" Clara tried to answer, but her teeth chattered too violently. She swayed, and the cowboy lunged forward, catching her before she collapsed completely. His gloved hands were firm but gentle as he lifted her into his arms. She smelled leather and pine and something clean, something safe. "You're freezing," he muttered. anger flickering in his eyes as he glanced at the dark house. He wrapped his coat around her and carried her to his horse. The cowboy's name was Caleb Turner. And though Clara did not know it yet, he had once been a man who believed he had nothing left to lose. A former trail hand turned ranch owner. Caleb kept mostly to himself on his spread a few miles away. He had seen enough hardship to recognize it instantly. And what he saw in Clara's bruised face and trembling frame stirred a fury he had not felt in years. He rode hard through the storm, shielding her with his body. When they reached his ranch house, he kicked the door open and laid her near the hearth. He built the fire high and wrapped her in blankets, rubbing warmth back into her hands. For hours, he stayed beside her, coaxing her to sip warm broth. When she finally opened her eyes fully, she found him watching her, not with suspicion or ownership, but with concern. "You're safe here," he said simply. Safe. The word felt foreign. Over the next days, Clara drifted in and out of sleep as her body recovered. Caleb never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. He gave her space, yet remained close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. When she finally told him about the advertisement, the promises, and the abuse, his jaw tightened. "A man who harms a woman he vowed to protect isn't a man," he said quietly. Word travels quickly in small territories. Within a week, Edgar Boone stormed into town claiming his wife had been kidnapped. But several townsfolk had long suspected his cruelty. When Clara, still pale but resolute, appeared beside Caleb at the general store and revealed the truth, the tide turned. Bruises speak louder than lies. Edgar's bluster faltered under the weight of witnesses willing to stand for once. That winter, Clara did not return to the farmhouse. Instead, she remained at Caleb's ranch, helping with small chores as she regained strength. The prairie still stretched wide and wild, but it no longer felt like a grave. It felt like possibility. Caleb never pressured her, never assumed. He treated her as a partner in conversation, not property. And slowly, the spark inside her grew into something brighter. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Clara stood by the window and realized she was no longer afraid of the wind. She had survived it. More than that, she had been seen in it. Caleb joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "Storm's passing," he said. Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "So am I." And in that quiet moment, the frozen prairie no longer felt like the end of her story, but the beginning. Spring did not arrive gently that year. It came like a promise fought for, pushing through stubborn frost and thawing rivers that had nearly forgotten how to run. Clara stood on the porch of Caleb's ranch house as the first green shoots pierced the melting snow. She breathed deeply, marveling at how different the air felt from the suffocating chill of that terrible night. She had begun to heal, not only in body, but in spirit. Yet healing does not erase shadows. Edgar Boone had not vanished quietly. Though the town no longer welcomed him warmly, resentment simmered in his pride. Clara knew it was only a matter of time before he tried to reclaim control. But she was no longer the frightened woman pounding on a locked door. She had allies now. She had her voice. Caleb noticed the tension in her shoulders whenever a rider approached in the distance. One afternoon, as they repaired fencing together, he paused. "You don't have to live looking over your shoulder," he said. Clara met his gaze steadily. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," she replied. And she realized it was true. The confrontation came at dawn. Edgar rode onto Caleb's property with two companions, shouting accusations. Clara stepped out of the house before Caleb could stop her. The sun rose behind her, casting a golden halo around her figure. Edgar sneered, calling her ungrateful, claiming she belonged to him. "I was never a belonging," Clara said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I was a wife. And you broke that vow." Townsfolk, alerted by the commotion, began arriving. Caleb stood at Clara's side, not in front of her. The distinction mattered. When Edgar attempted to grab her arm, Caleb intervened, but it was Clara's words that delivered the final blow. She publicly recounted the abuse, the night in the snow, the locked barn. Witnesses confirmed Edgar's temper. Under mounting pressure, the sheriff warned him to leave or face charges. For the first time, Edgar looked uncertain. He left in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. And though the future remained uncertain, Clara felt something extraordinary settle in her chest: freedom. In the weeks that followed, Clara began helping at the town's small schoolhouse, teaching children their letters and numbers. She discovered a quiet joy in guiding young minds. Caleb watched her flourish with admiration he rarely voiced but deeply felt. Their bond grew not from rescue alone, but from shared respect. Evenings were spent talking by the fire, laughter replacing silence. One night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Caleb spoke what had long rested in his heart. "You don't owe me anything," he began. "But if you ever wanted a partner, not a savior, not a master, just a partner, I'd be honored." Clara's eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with hope. "I choose my own path now," she said softly. "And I choose it with you." Their wedding was simple. Held under open sky with wildflowers gathered by schoolchildren. There were no grand promises of wealth, only vows of kindness, respect, and shared burdens. Clara kept her maiden name alongside his. A quiet declaration that she remained herself. Years later, when winter winds howled across the prairie, Clara would stand by the hearth of the home she had helped build. No longer shivering but smiling. She would remember the girl left in the snow and whisper gratitude for the cowboy, who saw her not as property, not as pity, but as a person worth saving. Her story spread beyond the territory, inspiring other women trapped in silence to seek help, to speak out, to believe in new beginnings. And whenever someone asked Clara how she found the courage, she would answer, "The storm didn't end me. It revealed me." If Clara's journey from abandonment to strength has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that even in the harshest winters, hope can ride through the snow, and sometimes, it wears a cowboy hat.